Good evening and welcome to In the Loop Bible Stream, episode number 7. It's great to have you tuning in tonight, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Well, it's been a beautiful day today with lots of sunshine, very similar to what Easter Sunday was. That was a gorgeous day. Resurrection Commemoration Day. And weather-wise, I don't think it could be improved on. What did you guys do? I have Dr. Stewart here with me tonight and Jason Brown. So what went on for you, Doc?
We hung out with our family, with David, who was in for Virginia, and Carly and her family came up with little Sam. So we were playing with Sam a fair bit. Just spent time with them. Nate and his family were there as well. For part of the time.
Did you get some outside activities going?
We walked around outside, mainly chasing Sam, and they played baseball and threw baseball around.
Okay.
I was hanging out with Sam most of the
time. A real baseball, like with gloves and everything?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Very good. And Jason, how about you?
Our church had a breakfast carry-in, so the turnout was really nice for that, and then it went into a service, and that was nice. So there was a lot of people that hadn't been there in a while that showed up, which was nice seeing them again because of the COVID thing.
Yeah.
And then some of the kids that don't usually come to church came to church, and so it's neat to hear kids in the church again, like a lot of them. So there was chaos, which was always enjoyable. And then after service, two of my boys and their women come over, and my wife's sister come over. And that was just fun, having camaraderie and just laughing, enjoying the day. And I visited my brother-in-law a little bit.
Good.
So it was nice.
Very good. Yeah, we had some extended family that we couldn't see. Well, not extended, immediate family. Josh and his kids, because of the COVID thing, have not been around. And because we were able to be outside, and we were able to have them with a lot of activities. You know, it seems that people used this holiday this year for kind of reasserting life after COVID, like you were just mentioning, Jason, about the church and families getting together. With all the close downs and interruptions, shutdowns, shut-ins during COVID, it seems like a lot of people jumped on this holiday to use it. As a matter of fact, it was reported that there were more Easter egg hunts around town than had been for a long time. And stores completely selling out of Peeps, and I think both the white and the yellow ones, and malted milk eggs and those kind of things. Matter of fact, Walmart after Walmart after Walmart didn't have, and they all sold out in other places like Target. By the way, Jason works as in distribution with Walmart, so he had a lot of hands-on experience with that. And my wife, not on Saturday before Christmas or Easter, but on the Monday after, went to Macy's due to a daughter's birthday, and the store was reporting that they had a bigger day than before Christmas with Easter. So folks definitely getting out. I was at Menards getting mulch to pass around, and it was hopping with folks and outdoor stuff. COVID did bring a lot of loss for folks, loss of jobs around in the economy, as you've heard, and the stimulus packages, which probably aided the shopping at Macy's, etc. And not only the loss, but a lot of anxiety and frustration, a lot of conspiracy theories running around about that. And, when you say frustration, you just kind of have to use what really that word stands in for often, and that's anger. A lot of folks angry with the whole situation. I'm going to ask Dr. Stewart a question because he works in the public a lot, works, of course, in the medical field, and won't be sharing anything in particular about that, but just generally, Dr. Stewart, as you were interacting with people during this COVID time, what kind of things did you encounter in that?
I'd say in most people, when I ask everybody a series of questions, and one of those questions is, are you anxious? And almost every person would say, I have some level of anxiety, not super anxious, but at least a little anxious, and that was across the board. So I think that kind of spells it out. In a pandemic, there's a low-lying level of anxiety in almost everybody, and that can be worse at times.
Yeah.
We saw that too, where people were very anxious, and
especially in the early parts when it was so uncertain.
I was anxious myself, going into rooms and not quite knowing all the facts on this virus, and my heart would beat faster when I was putting on the PPE in the beginning.
Yeah.
After you've done it for 3 months and done it hundreds of times, not so much.
Lightens up. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Jason also works with the workforce in the distribution business, and sentiments that were expressed there by these folks about and during COVID. What did you encounter?
Like he said, fear, a lot of fear of the unknown.
Okay.
And to them, it was like everything was out of control.
Okay.
And then, interesting enough, that opened a lot of doors to witnessing opportunities, which was positive on that. And then a lot of loneliness later on, because everybody was isolating,
Mm-hmm.
and then they were just tired of being lonely, or at home and work, and that was it. So
Yeah.
it definitely shocked a lot more people than what I thought it would. I mean,
Okay.
it just really,
Took
they
that.
panicked. A lot of
Yeah.
people panicked.
You said it before we started that you had a whole bunch of.
Oh yeah. The day they said it hit the building, we had a general meeting, and they said COVID hit the building, and that was halfway through our shift. And at the last half of the day, I had more witness opportunities in that half of the day than I had the previous 2-3 years.
Wow.
Because people knew I was a Christian and they had questions.
Wow, pretty cool. Wow, yes, definitely the case. This holiday at Easter was kind of a coming out for folks. A lot of folks getting some sense of relief with the vaccine and that kind of thing. And with God's big picture. As a matter of fact, the whole reason we started this In the Loop Bible stream to focus on the continuous story of the Bible was for the purpose of getting God's big picture on this. Now, it took us a while to kind of put this together and present it, and nevertheless, we do have a great deal of hope. One of the passages that comes to my mind and that we focused on is Romans chapter 15, verse 4, where the Apostle Paul is speaking and getting the picture of the whole story of the Bible helps us out, not only with the COVID situation, but with the things that we encounter in our political climate, in the culture wars, quote unquote, as are being said. And Paul said this, whatsoever things were written before. That was a reference to the Old Testament and what it contained, were written for our learning, that we, through the encouragement and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. That installation of hope, that we might have this hope, is a confident anticipation of the future. And what he says is that the learning and the encouragement and the comfort of the Scriptures is able to deliver hope if we respond to it, if we kind of go along with the flow of God's story. So on a broader scale than just the immediate response of the holiday. On a broader scale and a more significant scale, the fact that everyone is included in the events that take place in God's story, and that this story that he unfolds to us in the Bible is indeed up to and including the time of COVID, the time that we're in now in our country and around the world, because there have been steps that have been taken economically, not only in our country, but around the world to attempt to deal with that. So in the Luke Bible series, episode 7, we are going to take a look at the big picture in the storyline, and we are going to get kind of really down to an individual level as we see God unfolding this story. Now, we've sketched already, excuse me, this of the storyline graphic, that God's unfolding story, to put it in order, to kind of like put your closet in such a place that things are hung on the proper hooks, and the silverware in the junk drawer in the order so that it is all arranged, or the workbench having the pegboard. We've been able to put up these pegs to be able to put the Bible storyline in a graspable order. So these four things: the initial creation, and then man's fall, redemptive restoration, and then the new creation, consummation. And we use this conceptual picture for it, that these segments of the bridge that scans the West Bay from San Francisco to Oakland kind of shows out for us in a picture form these four backbone segments of God's story. Now, tonight, we're going to focus on the redemptive restoration part. We've spent some time with the other, so now it's going to be the redemptive restoration. And I want you to know that the process really speeds up here, and the bulk of the story that's in the Bible lies right in here. It's a progressive thing that God does step by step, and he does it intentionally, moving us along. So, with that, I'm going to share with you a quote that comes from a believer. His name is Michael Horton, as a matter of fact. The other day, Jason shared with me a book that Michael Horton had written. And so that book was, what was it that captured your interest in that book, Jason?
The name of it was Christless Christianity, I believe. And then caught my attention. I think people have lost their way on that. They get wrapped up in religion. They get wrapped up in routine and forgetting Christ.
Okay.
It's kind of the premise of the book.
Okay, so experience of even church for believers, and suddenly Christ kind of gets left out of the picture, that we're carrying a message rather than a moral code alone. We've got a message to bear, and Christ gets left out. Well, interestingly, Mike Horton he put together another thing called Core Christianity, Finding Yourself in God's Story, and he said this, and I'd like you guys to react to this. He said that making sense of this in the church that he was raised in, during the years he was there, one thing he could almost always count on was hearing teaching from the Old Testament that was character studies. We learned that Abraham was a man of faith. Joseph was an awesome example of how to stand against temptation. And if you just wait on the Lord's timing, he will be sure to make your way prosperous as well. Moses is, Moses. Joshua's life provides you with leadership tips to be strong and courageous. And then there was Samson. that was a character. That tough guy who used his muscles for the Lord. David, a man after God's own heart. And of course, we sang, Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to, you know how that song goes. One, in the Old Testament, I got the impression that it was a collection of hero stories that nevertheless didn't always seem to relate to each other. Then Mike goes on, he says, years later, I made the joyful discovery that those Old Testament stories were all connected. Each was a new episode in the unfolding drama of redemption. Each was a new episode in the unfolding drama of redemption. We've called it the redemptive restoration or redemptive rescue here. That's the part that we're talking about here tonight. This redemptive restoration, that all the stories are connected. Your exposure to the Old Testament, guys, how did it come across? Now, I was raised in a particular church that was ritualistic and liturgical, and there was just like nothing that I was exposed to growing up those years in the from the Old Testament anyway.
I was first involved in a Plymouth Brethren church. One of the integral parts of that church was the Lord's table, and so young men were encouraged to share mainly about Christ and redemption and thoughts about that, and from the Old and the New Testament. So we would think about things and pour over Old Testament scriptures like Abraham and his son, going to offer his son, for example, a great example of Christ offering himself for us.
So did they draw that analogy, the offering of Christ, with it?
Well, and we would have to think through that and bring that out at the time of
Interesting.
communion.
Yeah.
And so we would talk about we're remembering Christ and his sacrifice for us, and we're relating that to other scriptures that have touched our hearts, kind of.
Okay, so did that help you think through some of the Old Testament stories and how they were connected?
Several, yeah.
Interesting.
And looking up prophecies, things about Christ in Isaiah. And
So you
Psalms.
spurred one another on with that. Very good. How about you, Jason?
I think as a child, they were more superhero type.
Okay.
And then even in my first couple of years as a Christian, I think it was like, okay, I'm relating with the hero of the story. Okay, I must be David, and Goliath's my big problem.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. And then through his grace, somewhere along the line, the last 5 years, when that piece was put in there, that this is all about Christ,
Right.
then the Old Testament more enjoyable because I was looking for that. Then it excited me how this all goes together, and then it just is soothing to the soul. I don't know how else to say it.
Absolutely. Very good. So, yeah, Mike went on to say here that at the same time, I was surprised to learn that from the story that Abraham was capable of lying, scheming, and questioning God. Moses failed God several times and was barred from entering the promised land. And you could go on. How about talking about Samson? A few failures there in these stories. So the point that we're going to be looking at tonight, and we're going to kind of really pick up the pace tonight, because we're going to move from where we're at in the creation and the fall and this starting of the redemption and begin to put in the bulk of God's continuous story. That this is one story that is going in a particular direction that has a lot of opposition to it. Opposition not only here on earth from people, some who have a form of religion or godliness, but have not experienced the power thereof, the power to transform a life. Some of that kind of opposition, some of the kind of opposition that is outrightly opposed to biblical ideas, biblical ideas of sin, biblical ideas of what constitutes sin. Has God views this, which some of which are very controversial in our culture right now. And the story, as it unfolds, shows God's progressive working with his people. And as a matter of fact, he arrives in this redemptive story to where we are at right now and includes us in this. So, what kind of things, guys, have you, beyond COVID, experienced in life that have been frustrating, anxiety causing, even bringing you to the point of anger? Now, I don't have to have qualification for every event with all of that, but it's surely been an experience of mine. And I'll kind of give you a little chance to think about that by relating some for me. When I was a kid, I would watch things like Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn and see him get a raft and go on the Mississippi River. And I thought that was so cool, and trying to build my own raft because we had a stream that ran through our farm, a pond out in the woods. And I would attempt to build one of these rafts, and it always sank. Never got launched. And it was frustrating as a kid, all those things that didn't work out for me. And then things that were lost in this world. I remember having a friend in junior high, Bobby Green was his name, and him moving away and completely being gone. He was a close buddy. Haven't heard from him since. Those kinds of loss. Grandparents who moved to Florida and then passed away. Then a friend whose mom had cancer. My own grandmother going through a stroke and not being able to function. I remember standing there. Those kinds of things of loss. Some frustrating, some aggravating. You guys have any ones that you'd like to throw in here?
I think for me personally, when I view things in a worldly sense, put in a situation where I feel like I'm failing, or if life it never fails when you think you're doing okay, then the brakes go out, or the plumbing breaks, and it's stuff that's out of my control.
Why this? Why now? Why me?
Yeah, and I think if my focus is worldly, I get frustrated real quick. But if I go back to Scripture, then there's peace through that, and it's like, okay, this isn't the end of the world.
Yeah, there's a plan.
Yeah, wow.
And it's actually including this.
Yeah, I might actually learn from this.
And have an opportunity, like you mentioned, when this hit. Very good. Doc, do you have anything that you'd like to share with us?
Oh, when I think about frustration, I think about computers. And so
Nate, I don't know if Nate heard that.
I've had a lot of experience. The computer world, the cyber world that doesn't work as it should, or maybe I screw it up and it doesn't work like it should.
Yeah. On Sunday morning, just to relate to that, on Sunday morning I had put this whole thing together and was ready to print. And of course, got a timeline here. I'm staying in tune with a timeline. And I went over and I deleted something because I was finished with it, and it deleted my file too. Deleted the item and the file. And that was the only place I had. So yeah, I was sitting there panicking. Frustration with computer stuff. I could relate to that. Definitely. How about the political culture or climate right now and the culture? Anything aggravating, irritating? Yeah. I had mentioned at church Erwin Lutzer's book, We Will Not Be Silent, and just the opening part of this was, well, things like the secular left does not believe that America can be fixed. They say it must be destroyed. On the rubble of America's Judeo-Christian past, a new America will emerge, which they say will be free of poverty, racism, and white supremacy. The secular left goal is a future where everyone will be equal on their terms. Disparity will be a thing of the past. And then they go on, he talks about freedom of speech, and there is freedom of speech if, from their point of view, if you speak in favor of their position. And if it's a right position, then no, you're going to be nullified. And so initially I would well say that I had a great deal of anger over that, and a great deal of frustration and anxiety that would come my way. So much so that my family would recognize it. And so facing this biblically, like Jason said a little bit ago, there's actually something in here that's in the flow of the Bible storyline. And the scriptures are written that we have hope and confidence and anticipation. So tonight, as we go through this, we're going to be taking a look at this whole situation here that's on the screen for you right now. This one about the fall that we looked at last week, and Adam had a great fall, and nothing's putting it back together again. There won't be any new scheme where ideas come up that's going to put this all back together again. And we took a look at this cute little story of someone falling in a precipice, maybe a skier, and he's treated. And God does this progressively. He treats man in the fall to put him back together again so that Eden, that is lost with Adam, comes back. And we took a look at the Bible storyline in that area of the support. This is the underlying support that God builds in regards to the redemptive restoration or redemptive rescue. How did Michael Horton say it? The episodes in unfolding in the drama of redemption. That's how he said it. And so we looked at these folks in this. Noah and God's use and call of Noah, Abraham and God's call and use of Abraham, step by step, taking man out of this fall where he's broken, and it is broken. You don't have to watch news much or see much in regards to even shows that this is broken. And Moses, God's use of Moses, David, and Jesus, and he did these by establishing covenant arrangements with them. We're going to be talking about a covenant, what you understand a covenant to be in a moment. But interesting as you look through these and you see that God makes, as Jason identifies, that this whole thing is about Christ. And as Doc referred to a little bit ago, when they would talk about Abraham and the sacrifice of his son and what was presented there in a fashion that is prototype and suggestive and inference concerning Christ. As a matter of fact, with Abraham, I took note of this. If you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring. And the promise in the covenant that God made with Abraham, and you are heirs according to the promise. This is you. If you belong to Christ, you are Abraham's offspring, and you are an heir of Abraham, and via Abraham, Christ, according to the promise that he made. This was added too. Know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham. There are the direct connections that are made here between them then and there, us here and now, and the story still continues in regards to handling this. So we're going to go back and we're going to start to talk, and we're going to kind of move through a lot of things. I'm going to need your input on this. So I want you to do that, guys. And if you have some input, send it our way. We're going to talk about Noah. So I'm going to ask you to turn over, if you would, to Genesis chapter 6, guys. Genesis chapter 6, verse 8 is where we're going to look at. And this is the Lord. The Old Testament talks about God, but there were gods of the Philistines and that kind of thing also. It talks about God, but it gives him a very personal name. God has a name, and that name has meaning, and that name was Yahweh. With some of the vowels that were used, it's called Jehovah. Yeshua is also a statement that could be made for his name, New Testament wise. So in Noah, what did God do to move us along towards this redemptive restoration when everything was broken in Adam? Specifically, I'd like to start by taking a look at what we noticed last week was lost when God set up Adam in Eden, and Adam took this step of being independent, autonomous of God's direction, thinking he could figure this out better on his own. And so initially God set up a people for himself, Adam and Eve, and he said, your seed. And he set it up in Eden, which Eden wasn't the garden was in Eden, which meant the pleasant, the luxurious place of God's presence there. That's what Eden was. And God put this presence in a place, the place of God, the Garden of Eden, for the purpose of God. And that was to extend Eden. Expand Eden, fill the earth to the ends of the earth. So all of that was lost. And we're going to track that to see how God progressively brings this back online through each one of these people and their covenants. So Noah, chapter 6, verse 8 of Genesis. But Noah found grace or favor in the eyes of the Lord. So, continuous story. Worldwide, Noah found grace. So, as you are aware of grace, did Noah find this grace because he was such a great guy? What's your thoughts on that? No? All right, there's just flat out no from Jason. What about you, Doc?
It was God. Grace is God's help. So
Okay.
he was inclined towards God, but I think God was working in his heart, made him inclined.
Okay. So he says that God took the initiative, and indeed the statement in Scripture is that Noah finds grace first in the eyes of the Lord, and then Noah is impacted. He begins to think righteous guy, verse 9 and following on that he actually starts to bring it home, kind of the order that you see. So in this situation, how bad did things get?
During the time?
Yeah, during the time here.
Horrible.
Horrible. Okay.
As
Fill it in.
bad as it could get. Every thought of man, only evil continually.
Okay. What an amazing statement. Only harmful, only hurt, everything. This autonomous thing really played out well for us. No, it didn't. Only evil continuously. And so God is grieved that he makes man on the earth. And of course, as we noted last week, that this was an involvement of some principalities and powers that left their first estate. They had kind of gone beyond what was their design, and they went in opposition because of what God had set up. So now we're going to add to this a little bit. God cleanses the earth because the people are completely chaotic. There is continuously, as Doc noted for us, this going on in man, and the two lines that were to be established, the line of the seed of the woman and the line of the seed of the serpent, those two lines became so messed up that God just cleansed the thing. You know, there's a controversy about the flood, that it was worldwide or no, it was local. And God took this step. So, what's your thoughts, worldwide or local?
It covered the whole face
The
of the
whole
earth,
earth,
as
yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, it was made pretty clear, wasn't it? It went up above. And even when you visit sometimes internal United States, some of the inner parts, you see geological things that say this area was once under seawater. And, it's kind of this fossil record. Of course, they put on different interpretations to the fossil record. Nevertheless, there is real warrant for this thing. So this step of God, when you hear that God destroyed the earth, what kind of impression do you get of what this meant to God?
He's serious.
Yeah. Pretty
I
serious.
mean, and it shows the consequence and the seriousness of sin.
Okay. Yeah, this is huge. I mean, this is a big event. It's startling even today. And
For a holy God, there's an element of I have to deal with sin. There's justice that has to happen because of unrighteousness.
okay. And this was just being spread on and on and on. So God, with favor, begins to express subjectively kindness, objectively graciousness or favor towards Noah. And you find this. He brings the flood. Noah is protected in the flood. And afterwards, Genesis chapter 8, verse 20, Noah comes out and he expresses worship to the Lord. And verse 21, notice the interesting response. Would you read that for us, Jason? Genesis 8:21.
And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever strike down every living creature as I have done.
Okay, so God makes this statement as they come out of this whole cleansing thing, and then he enters in to this arrangement with Noah. He makes a covenant. Now, what do you understand a covenant to mean? If you look at verse number 8 of Genesis 9, he says this specifically, then God said to Noah and his sons, verse 9, behold, Genesis 9:9, behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you. So, what do you take a covenant to be? What is it when he refers to covenant?
It's a promise.
A promise. Okay, involves a promise. Anything else to add to this? An agreement?
It's kind of like
Okay, pardon me?
an agreement's kind of like a promise.
Okay, yeah, well, there's a difference there. A promise is something that you make for the future, present, as well as the future. This definitely had promise in it. An agreement is, okay, this is your part, this is my part. As a matter of fact, covenants were very big. Over and over, God uses covenants. Covenants were common for those people. Contracts are common for us today, and it's kind of along that same lines. You provide this, I provide that. This is the benefit. This is what you get. This is what I get. This is what's happening. So, in response, God makes this covenant with Noah, and he unfolds this here. Matter of fact, when you follow Genesis 9, you see that God repeats. He says, verse 6, I'm going to establish government. So there's some kind of governing of human beings. Whoever sheds, you can kind of see how harmful this was. whoever sheds the blood of man, by man's hand shall his blood be shed, for he made him in the image of God, to be a God image bearer here. So he said, be fruitful, multiplying, and fill the earth. So again, God enters into establishing a people. He takes through Noah. That's what the covenant says. And your sons. So he's going to reestablish with a people, and he's going to reestablish his purpose, that we fill earth with people under covenant with me. And he again confirms that he'll never destroy the earth. So what we had lost of a people of God, God begins to put back together. And a people with a purpose, he says. Now, we're going to move on to Abraham. So, as they move from Noah, Noah has descendants, the end of chapter 9, and Noah's descendants end up building a tower. Descendants from these lines. And there was, well, if you remember, right away after Noah came out and was able to plant a vineyard, he failed God, getting drunk, and his son, Ham, failed. And there's some event that took place, and there is some standing judgment that Noah gives him, verse 25 of that. And then the descendants of them, those children of Noah who were preserved through the flood, build a tower. And they're going to replace God. So God deals with that, and he calls Abraham. Notice with me Genesis 12:1. Now the Lord said to Abram, whose name was changed to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your family to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. Genesis 12:2. I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and those who dishonor you I will curse, have a standing judgment on you, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So we have God setting up with Abraham this call and this agreement. Again, a promise here is given, again with a responsibility for us to handle this. And the promise includes every nation on the earth. So, what does God do according to this as he progressively puts it back together? What was lost in Eden? What he lost in Eden of a people, he starts with Noah and he establishes, I will make you, this is a family, a tribe, and you will be made into a great nation. He has a place now, the land of Canaan, which he calls them to. He calls Abraham to that, and he has the purpose. In you, all the people, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So that's the next step forward. A people lost. In Noah, he begins to establish a people. In Abraham, he expands those people. He gives them a place. He reiterates his purpose. Then we go on to Moses. And Moses becomes, Moses is the rest of Genesis, chapters 12 through chapter 50, is all about these kids of Abraham and how they handle this covenant arrangement. And there's many ups and downs in there, but it's all about them. Then when we get to Exodus, after the folks there are in Egypt again, and they're in bondage in Egypt, God calls Moses. And Exodus chapter 1, there's the oppression that's increasing, and Moses chapter 2 is born. Now, we're not going to spend the time, this is a huge part of the story, to talk about them coming out of Egypt and escaping Egypt. And yet we need to add what the storyline adds here. So going to Exodus chapter 19. Exodus chapter 19. We see God bringing his people out, and they eventually arrive at Mount Sinai. And Mount Sinai, God begins to establish a covenant with these people. And it describes what Mount Sinai was like. And in chapter 10, he begins to lay out a summary of what this is, a summary of what God's laws are. So now he's got a people, and he's going to really design and build these people. He's going to give them a place. He takes them not only to Canaan, but Moses actually delivers them to the land, this promised land. He never gets to go in because of what his choice was in handling what God's direction was. Never gets to go in, but nevertheless, Moses does deliver them to the land. Before he does, he gives them, these are how life is to operate. And he gives them a sign of this covenant. Remember what the sign of this covenant was? Sign of this covenant is circumcision. This is circumcision. And he gives them not only as a people of God an identity and direction, he not only takes them to the place of God, the promised land, he also provides for them a new thing, the presence of God in the tabernacle being present. They, for the first time since the fall, now have an access to the full presence of God. Of course, this is very descriptive how he gives it. As a matter of fact, when you look through these passages, like in Exodus chapter 24, where he actually begins to give this covenant. So turning over to Exodus chapter 4.
4 or 20.
I'm sorry, 24, thank you. Yeah. Exodus chapter 24, where it says that Moses, then he said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, and he gives a list of the folks, and Moses alone was allowed to come near, and the people could not come up. And Moses came and told all the people the words of the Lord, all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice, all the words that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Wow. That's motivation. It's a situation where God's presence was so strong, what that had been when he gave this. So Moses wrote down all the words. Now, the tablets probably, they had to have more than just the 10 Commandments, which was a summary of the law. But Moses wrote down all the words in verse 7, and he took the book of the covenant and he read it in the hearing of all the people. And they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. We will obey. That's what's being gone after here. And Moses took the blood and he threw it on the people. This was the blood of a sacrifice that had been done. And he threw it on the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all of these words. And then verses 25 and 26, they build this tabernacle where they have access to the presence of God again. So what is restored? The people of God are built. The place of God is arrived at. The presence of God is provided in this, and the purpose of God is made clear. We are to influence the world with how we're responding to God. So, interesting statement is made in Leviticus concerning what he did with this blood. This is a note from part of the book that describes the laws. For this is Yahweh talking, the Lord, and he said, "The life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul." That's another step in this story that has a whole bunch of attending stories, but they're all contributing here to what Moses was setting up. And then in this progressive rebuilding, David is introduced. David is brought on to the scene, who eventually becomes king. And what does David add? Well, they already have a people of God that's established, but these people of God are given a person, a personality who is in line with God's own heart. In 1 Samuel chapter 13, verse 4, it says, God is going to seek out somebody who has a heart that is after his own. You know, guys, it's interesting. You hear David, who we're talking about here, has a heart after God's own heart. And yet, immediately after this, in Samuel, he ends up in the Bathsheba scene. What do you understand this thing after God's own heart to be? That God looked for and saw in David and actually used David as this person who becomes the prototype for Jesus. We're going to look at the covenant that he made with him in a moment, and we'll see what he said as his son being forever a ruler. What do you understand this heart after God's own to be?
Isn't that he intended and wanted to serve God in
Okay.
his way?
Okay, so there was something in his attitude towards God that wasn't in Saul, because the statement here, Saul is disqualified because of where his heart is, and he removes him. In David, what is there?
Love for God, strong desire, mentioned intention.
Okay. Do you recall the situation with Nathan and Bathsheba? Nathan was the prophet, and Nathan comes in and speaks to David, who's the king. And being the king, he would have been having all those soldiers at his command. I mean, remember what he did to Bathsheba's husband under his command. So here's Nathan, who's a prophet, and he comes in and addresses him in the king's court and tells him, you are the man. You are the man, based on his little story about the lamb in a family. How could David responded to that?
Could have gotten angry and killed him.
Yeah, just could have. I mean, there'd been nothing. I mean, nothing. He would have been just like everybody else. And what is David's response? He bends. His heart bends towards God. It goes after God's heart, after God's own heart. He went. And so this independent, autonomous, it's going to be what I think is best. Here he is, king, powerful situation. Nobody second guesses the king on this. There's not going to be a court of appeals over him. And he bends because of what God did. So, similar situation. He becomes the prototype of Jesus, And here's Jesus who says, not my will. And he bends to God's will. So, interesting how David goes. The covenant with David is there in 2 Samuel 7, 1 through 17. It would take a while to develop that tonight, so I'm not going to do that. But you can read it. As a matter of fact, also there is a psalm, and this psalm is excellent, Psalm 89, because it describes this whole covenant that he made with David, Psalm 89, and what he said he would do to deal with God's people and what he set up with David. So that brings us then to Jesus and the new covenant in the story. So, finish this for me. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, shed for you and for many, that sin may be forgiven. So Jesus takes this to the place where firmly established forever are the people of God and the presence of God made more available than ever before in a new way, a new and living way, which Jesus inaugurated, the New Testament tells us, through his own flesh, and actually puts the presence of God's Spirit within us. The purpose of God is clear for us. Go to make disciples. So the place of God is clear. This is a body in which the Spirit indwells. So all four of those are restored in a higher level, but it's not complete yet. It's not complete yet. And this is exactly where we come in the story. The new covenant has been established. It has been provided for us, but this story is not complete yet. God is still glorifying himself by taking out a people for his name and using this to display what he can do through people. It was the same thing he did from Noah, through Abraham to Moses, and now in David. It is set and finalized, through Jesus in the new covenant. It is set and finalized, but it's not yet fully arrived. And that's where we're at in this flow of the story. We're carrying the mission of redemptive restoration to people in a culture now that has war, much of it, war with this plan of redemption. And what do we do? How do we respond to this? Do we look beyond what presently upsets me to the purpose that God has for us in this? And if we do, how do we behave in doing this? Thoughts? There's a lot of things that are going on. A lot of things that have some removing the definition of marriage that's been Christian. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two he made them male and female. That's clear. Culture war over that. Go ahead.
My first thought was, I think it's in Peter, he tells the people to submit to, and that time Aaron stuff, and their leader was a lunatic.
Okay.
But God was sovereign. He allowed all that, and it served his purpose. The church grew in that.
Okay. And who were you talking about was a lunatic?
In the First Peter, I think. First Peter.
Okay. And during the time of the Caesars?
Yeah.
Okay.
My my initial thought, I get wrapped up in now, and I have that privilege as an American citizen to be boisterous, and I
We
get
can.
caught up in that.
Right.
And I need to remember that, regardless of who's in control, my mission's the same.
That's right.
And I have one purpose, and that's to glorify God. And that's regardless of what's going on. So that simplifies it tremendously, because it's like, well, this is what I'm called to do.
Right.
But it's hard because if I get wrapped up in the world, then I
Yeah.
get blood pressure goes up, and I focus it down here instead of up there.
That's right. And so this is why the storyline becomes so extremely important. We need to set our affections on those things. Absolutely. Absolutely. And rather than in myself just murmuring and complaining, which is easy to do, we can speak truth lovingly, but nevertheless truth. So these were the covenants that were established, taking us to the New Jerusalem, which hasn't yet arrived. How sure is the New Jerusalem? Definite. Definite. And the tree of life and the river that flows from God, it's definite and confirmed. And we're just kind of passing through here, being about God's purpose as God's people in God's place because of what God has done. So tonight we have kind of run this whole picture of the Bible's story, and this is the storyline that God has provided for us. So we're going to add a few details to this and then go into the consummation of this story. Any notes that you'd like to share, guys, as we close up tonight? Pardon me?
I'm glad he saw that.
Amen. Amen. One thing Jesus said when he instituted Matthew chapter 26, the Lord's table, he said that I will not drink this cup with you again until I drink it new in the kingdom of heaven. The New Jerusalem. That's how sure this was for us. I want you to know this is a game changer for me. It has changed the game completely. And it calls for us to set our minds here, intentionally taking our minds here. Amen? Amen. Well, we want to thank you for joining us. We're going to have a brief word of prayer and let you be dismissed from our presence. And we'll probably talk here a little bit. If you want to, you can ask later what we talked about. Father in heaven, we thank you for this, because this storyline, though it has a lot of rich history and there is much to it, it demonstrates consistently that not one word of all that you have spoken has failed. And Father, you bring it about as it is this day to preserve many people alive, just like you told to Abraham's descendants. That's why you're doing it. And Father, may we be wise in keeping our eyes on the big storyline and the big purpose. It'll guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. His name I pray. Amen. Amen. Take care, and we'll see you. Bye.